Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Dolores Fabiano, Executive Director of the South Niagara Chambers of Commerce. And on behalf of the Niagara Chamber Partnership, which includes Fort Erie, Grimsby, Lincoln, Niagara Falls, Niagara-on-the-Lake, Thorold, Port Colborne, Waynflete, Welland, Pelham, and West Lincoln Chambers, I'm very happy to be with you this morning. Once again, we have a great panel lined up to discuss an issue that's impacting just about everyone, labor. Earlier this year, our Niagara Chamber Partnership, along with Niagara Training Board and Trusted Time, conducted an employee survey. We had 570 respondents, and the information we gathered was quite telling in terms of employee retention and engagement. Our conversation this morning will focus on the local labor market, where the jobs are, how companies are recruiting, and resources available to employers. I want to thank our tech sponsor, B4 Networks, truly the tech specialists that everyone needs. We're also incredibly fortunate to have John Armstrong from Armstrong Communications, a longtime champion for our local chambers, as the moderator for this series. So without further delay, I'll turn it over to you, John.
Thank you, Dolores. And I'd like to welcome our guests for today. We are joined by Vivian Kinnaird from the Niagara Workforce Planning Board, Blake Landry from Niagara Economic Development, and Paul Robertson from the Employment Health Center in West Niagara. Welcome, everybody. Why don't we start things off with you, Blake? Can you help us set the stage for what we are seeing in Niagara in terms of labor trends?
Okay, so it's no surprise that we're in the middle of a pandemic right now, and that there is a labor shortage. However, we're seeing growth in the labor market. We've already seen pretty much labor market recovery across the boards. So we're up to 232,000 in the labor market. Pre-pandemic, it was about 220,000. So we're seeing definite improvements in recovery. However, it's not across all sectors. So there's some that are fully recovered and doing well, and obviously some that are not.
Right. So you said that we've recovered to pre-pandemic levels. Is that what I heard you say?
Yes, correct. The labor force has recovered, and employment as well. We're actually doing better than pre-pandemic levels when you look at January 2020 to September 2021. But as mentioned, it's not the same across all sectors. When we look at sector by sector, the dynamics change quite a bit.
So that would mean then, Vivian, that some sectors actually are up, where in terms of the people that they have employed, where others have shortages. Where are we up? Like what's that dynamic?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And Blake has said, our labor market in Niagara is bigger. And what we do is we compare what it was immediately pre-pandemic to what it is now. So, for example, in September 2019, we had over 11,000 fewer people working in manufacturing than we do now. So we've had a huge swing in employment in manufacturing, in transportation, and supply chain kind of jobs. And where the decrease is in, not surprisingly, accommodation and food services, hospitality related types of work. And that's because that sector was the hardest hit in the pandemic and is very slow to recover. And actually forecasts are suggesting it won't recover properly for at least another year. And that's got to do with the level of tourism, both that has been a result of the border closures and other issues, but people are just not moving around. So yeah, I mean, the gains are in the kind of manufacturing area for sure.
And what's your assessment of the reason for those gains in manufacturing, for example? I mean, we've had some other sessions where we were talking with business people who did talk about how they've had to adapt through COVID, finding new markets, finding new suppliers, and is that because they've maintained those new suppliers and those new markets with the old ones coming back? Like what are you feeling, Paul?
Yeah, I'm we're seeing that. It's funny that you talked about manufacturing because we just completed our fourth quarter survey of the West Niagara area, so I can speak directly to what we're seeing there. In that survey, we surveyed just over 500 employers in West Niagara, get a response rate of about 65 to 70%. And we're showing the largest net growth is expected to happen in the manufacturing sector. So our results, I'm glad to hear that our results are that accurate. We show right across the board about 42% net increase. So 42% of employers surveyed are expecting an increase. There was no, the numbers this quarter were very similar right across the board. In past, the last few quarters, we were seeing it more in the hospitality industry, but I'm wondering if the hospitality industry is getting more and more hesitant in what their approach is. So they're kind of unsure on what they're going to see. But the manufacturing, I think we've also been seeing a lot of people saying that they want a new career. They don't want to do this anymore. We want something else. And so perhaps that has opened up the doors because there has been this need in so many different sectors that we've been seeing people transitioning out of one and into another.
Yeah. Is that notion of changing jobs or changing careers with potential growth in the manufacturing sector? Is that because those jobs are considered to be better jobs, maybe better paying jobs, better benefits, or more security, or just a change? What's your perception, Blake?
I think it's probably job stability. So during the pandemic, manufacturing was hit at the start, but they stabilized quickly, and then it's been all growth since then. And then when we look at the trade figures, so manufacturing exports for Niagara are usually about $4 billion a year. Well, during the pandemic, they grew by $2 billion. So they reached $6 billion. So as a lot of just manufacturing exports from Niagara. So there's a lot of supply chain issues people are talking about. The Niagara companies have been very successful at kind of positioning themselves in these global supply chains. That's how you grow your exports by $2 billion. Alternatively, our imports actually shrunk. So a lot of manufacturers here have been feeling those supply chain problems because it's obvious our imports have gone down. However, the manufacturers that are able to have the inputs and be able to sell their product, they've actually seen quite a bit of growth. So it's really interesting. I think a lot of it is international dynamics that is really driving manufacturing in the region.
Yeah, certainly. I know that there's been a lot of talk in our sessions as well on how the supply chain is not just about disrupted supply chains, but it's actually sort of significantly increased demand in the supply chains because of people's changing spending habits during the pandemic, and that's forcing supply chains to move onshore when previously they may have been offshore. How much do you think, Vivian, this is a really subjective question, sorry. How much do you think of that is pandemic related versus what seems to be a repositioning of, I guess, to your point, like the broader geopolitical implications of decoupling with China, as people have been talking about?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think I would say that some of these trends were already on course pre-pandemic. So, we saw just before the pandemic hit that manufacturing was growing, not only in Niagara, but also in other parts of Ontario and Canada. We come off some of the geopolitical issues that were going on in the United States and how Canada was maybe, and Ontario in particular, was maybe benefiting from some of that. And then what happened in the pandemic is everything just accelerates. So as Blake already said, for manufacturing in Ontario, but particularly here in Niagara as well, it was hit hard early. And the supply chain disruptions was really, I think, from listening to employers around, we've got to just pause for a minute to figure out what we're going to do here. And I remember being in some conversations where small business employers, they were working together within their own supply chains to try and figure things out. So one business was maybe ready to go, but then their supplier wasn't. So there was a little bit of a slowdown there, but they bounced back quickly. And I think from the summer of 2020 onwards, we just saw this surge. And also, pointing to some of Blake's comments before, there's been a lot of investment as well in Niagara come in, and a lot of work is going on in the background, which are creating jobs and creating labor demand.
Right. So Paul, with this kind of increased labor demand and people changing careers and with an interest in changing careers, as you were talking about, and Blake's comment about stability, is that having an impact on the competitiveness of wage packages that are being offered? I mean, I live in beautiful Beamsville, Ontario, and I was driving past McDonald's, and they have a sign out there that basically says benefits start immediately.
Yep, absolutely. We're seeing it right across the board, right? It doesn't really matter the industry, but we are starting to see that it's no longer the requirements and the job duties. It's more, why work for us, right?
Right.
And so, we are seeing that. We're seeing talks about, signing and retention bonuses, educational benefits, paying for your education, advancement opportunities. We're seeing an increase in radio advertisements for employers. At least I'm noticing that myself, driving into work every day, about job fairs specifically. And we're starting to see those out in the Toronto area starting to reach out this way as well, for their short staff. So there is that competitiveness across the regions as well. Yeah, it's certainly something that we're seeing more. I've always encouraged my employers, especially pre-pandemic, to advertise that. Why work for you? And we started to see it, but we're really seeing an uptick now. Everybody is advertising it. Interestingly, I was away on a trip Labor Day weekend up north, drove past a Tim Hortons, and they were actually advertising daily pay.
Right.
Yeah. So Blake, it hasn't been a seller's market for in the job market for a long time. I imagine some sectors that have been in high demand, particularly probably in tech for some period of time, but just kind of on across the board. When was the last time we actually saw this kind of a market in Niagara, for example, and what do you think the impact's going to be?
Yeah, this is really interesting. I've been looking at this stuff for quite a long time, and I never noticed like this level of demand. So I think it was coming here. Like what we're seeing is like an extra regionalization of the labor force. So now, people in Niagara can work in Hamilton, can work in the GTA, and vice versa. So what's happening is you're opening up the entire labor force of the golden horseshoe. And however, there's still labor shortages, as I'm sure you're aware from listening to businesses. So, it is very interesting. I've never seen anything like this. It was interesting before the pandemic. We were doing exceptionally well. We had like a record low unemployment rate. Then the pandemic hit and it turned everything upside down. But now we're getting back to that trajectory. And now the issue is labor shortages and competition for people. So I think businesses are going to have to get really creative and innovative in terms of what they're doing. Like Paul mentioned, offering other packages, offering other things that could be attractive to new staff, offering new benefits, offering higher wages. And again, it's not just the wages, it's everything from, the type of work to the benefits to the culture of the workplace. All of these things I think are influencing it. And I believe the pandemic kind of exacerbated it. So it's really evident in the data right now in terms of a major shift in labor across the whole country, that is.
Yeah, Vivian, go ahead. Yeah.
Can I just add to that, John? I just wanted to emphasize what Blake was saying there. Dolores mentioned some work that we'd done with Trusted Time earlier in the summer. And, when we look at some of our survey results of employees, we asked them two questions. One was, what was the most important aspects of a job offer? And number one is compensation, and then number two is the meaningfulness of the work. But when you ask the same employees, what keeps you in a job? What makes you stay? The number one answer is their personal satisfaction with their work. So just pointing, not the compensation necessarily, because, for employers out there, yes, attracting people with a good compensation package. And as Paul talked about, signing bonuses, and there's all kinds of things going on right now, waiving of probations and all of that kind of work thing. But once you've got somebody, you want to keep them, especially if you've put some investment into training them. And the best way to do that is thinking about other aspects of the workplace. And employers need to pay attention to that and use the resources available.
Yeah, it's interesting because when we've been talking about shortages, we've been talking about, I think, probably lower skilled work. And I think we've had some shortages in Niagara and at some of the higher skill levels or the higher jobs for some time, our ability to attract that kind of talent. But now sort of seeing that punched into the lower skilled work. To your point, Vivian, about that sense of satisfaction and meaningfulness. Sometimes it can be a challenge when you're in lower paid jobs. So you've got the double whammy of poor compensation and then without that sense of meaning. How do companies deal with that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, John. I would say that the challenges are right across the entire spectrum of work now, entry-level jobs, lower skilled jobs, right through, as you say, to professional jobs. The point about the hypermobility now of the labor market at all job levels too. I mean, even in entry-level jobs and lower skilled jobs, people can easily travel from Niagara to Hamilton, or the outskirts of the eastern Hamilton for work. So we see a lot of movement around the region. But I think, what we need to be thinking about is even at a low paid level job, people want to feel valued for the work they're doing. And then employers just building a slight ladder there on what the opportunity is after 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, and it's not necessarily, is there a little bit of on the job training? Is there somebody on the shop floor that is experienced that people can shadow and work with? It just gives them a little bit of an entry point into the workplace, and then a feeling that the employer values their contribution and is willing to think about how they could move up if they show the right skill set. So it's just paying attention to these little details, I think, could make the difference.
Yeah. Paul, when you're working with your client base and helping people find jobs, are you what are you hearing on the ground as it relates to that sense of purpose or meaning or satisfaction, or is it primarily just finding a job with some of the convenience factors being close to home with high compensation?
Yeah, we're certainly seeing, the comments like, I want a better, work-life balance, those types of things. I want a job that means something a little bit more to me intrinsically, maybe. So we're definitely coaching them on that, right? Developing that. We're working with maybe with a lot of different goals that clients are setting for themselves from the outstart. We're seeing an increase in our training. We're using our second career applications. I would hazard to guess that those are up. So those are when individuals come to us and want to make a career change due to a layoff. We're starting to see an increase in that, especially demand, whether they're eligible or not. We're seeing a demand in that. And we're also seeing it through our Canada Ontario job grant. So that goes to the retention piece. And trying to strengthen the existing workforce, where we're reimbursing employers for the training that they're sending their employees to. One of the interesting trends that I'm seeing this year with that is that we're seeing the dollars being spread amongst more individuals. So we're not just seeing your key employees being sent for training in order to retain them. and the cost of the training being high, we're seeing it spread amongst a lot more employees. So there's smaller cost of training. However, it's more of the entry level that they're now moving to the next level, as opposed to our maybe middle management moving into senior management.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So Vivian, do you think that the training that Paul's talking about is anchored in, I can't get employees who are qualified outside, so therefore I'm going to have to train my own staff? Or do you see it as a retention component anchored in helping to create a sense of job satisfaction? Because it kind of sounds like those two things are converging with the because very often previously, I don't know what your experience is Paul, but when people are going through job transitions, it's often reluctantly, and retraining programs are things that are have previously been more dreaded than you can't teach an old dog new tricks kind of stuff, and with fear and trepidation. And now people are actively pursuing changes. That's requiring additional training. Employers are offering more training because they can't get people, and that has the potential to increase satisfaction. So what do you think? Are we seeing a convergence of a very good thing here, Vivian?
Yeah, it could be. It's a good way of thinking it and framing it, John. I think there a few things again are happening all at the same time. You've got employers with kind of back against the wall, like needing to find people. That's going to drive them to start thinking about these things. You have, as Paul pointed out, workers or either job seekers or even people currently in work deciding they're wanting to balance work with well-being. We talk about well-being. That's quite a common thread now. And then making job choices and even career decisions or job change choices based on that well-being balance, work-life balance, whatever you want to call it. And then you also are seeing through the pandemic, at least at our provincial government, but even at the federal government level, quite some changes to the funding for the training, and quite innovative ways in which employers can be engaged. Paul talked about the second career that's been reduced to 1 year. I'm aware of lots of provincially funded training that's going on with respect to under the kind of umbrella of economic recovery that is in on-the-job training, short-term training, micro-credentials. There's all kinds of new and innovative ways in which employers and job seekers can engage with the training. So I think people are voting with their feet and saying, I want to change things up. The pandemic has taught me A, B, and C. I want to change things up. But at the same time, you've got opportunities to train, not maybe perhaps being as painful, John, as they were in the past, because they're maybe not as long-winded or don't require you going back to school full time or whatever it is. So it's a very dynamic environment. And I think a lot of the points you were making there all have converged.
Yeah. So Blake, I know across North America, but just to pick on our little Niagara, we've been talking for decades, it would seem, about the impending labor shortage due to the aging population. Then certainly we were seeing kind of pre-pandemic that people were starting to stay in the workforce longer. And then there was certainly encouragement for people to stay in the workforce longer. I'm not sure what kind of an impact has the pandemic had on whether or not people are actually staying in the workforce, or as part of this overall work-life balance and these kind of reevaluation caused a number of people to actually leave the workforce and decide to actually take that retirement, and has that contributed to some of the shortages?
Well, you're right. Niagara, historically, we've been an older demographic than Ontario and Canada, and that does have a direct impact on our labor force. When you look at a lot of the labor force growth, a lot of it is people coming into the region, as well as younger people. So I think the pandemic actually may have encouraged a lot of people in their retirement years, 65 plus, to actually, leave the workforce. But that said, our labor force grew, between prior to the pandemic and now. So that's a combination of, younger people in Niagara getting into the labor force, and then people moving into Niagara. However, through the pandemic, we did see quite a few people, and I even have a lot of anecdotes of my own family. My mother, for instance, left the labor force during the pandemic. It just was not worth it for her anymore to work as a nurse during the pandemic. She's past that part of her career. So I think it's a combination. But we are doing a great job in Niagara attracting people here. So we're anticipating 6% population growth over the next 5 years alone. So that's like 20,000 people or so. So we're doing a great job attracting people here. But you're correct. The aging demographic, the baby boomers, are exiting the labor force, and that is actually creating a lot of challenges with businesses, especially the retention of, those business specific skills, those management skills. Someone has 30 years or 40 years worth of experience in a company or an industry. That's really hard to lose. So we're in a transition period, and it's going to be tough. That said, it's being experienced in Ontario and across the country as well. However, we just happen to have a slightly older demographic here. But that is something that's going to be a challenge, I would suggest, for the next 10 years.
How much of the influx of new residents coming into Niagara, certainly pre-pandemic, the sense was it was basically people retiring out of the GTA, taking the capital that they've built up in their houses, and then coming to Niagara, where housing at that point still is more affordable than it was in the GTA. Then certainly during the pandemic, we've heard more and more about as related to also more broadly housing affordability and lack of housing affordability that we're all facing. So I guess my question is the influx of new residents, is that demographic changing? Is it moving from predominantly retired seniors down more into working age people, and does that help to create the increase in the workforce? Paul, what do you think?
Interesting. We're seeing, I guess because we're there to help, but I am seeing an increase in the older worker coming to see us. Those that are even, as old as 70 plus 70, still wanting to stay in the labor market. They were perhaps laid off throughout the pandemic, specifically in the administrative area. It was very difficult during the pandemic for those looking for administrative work, especially if you left somewhere and you were looking for something new and you were an older worker. It was very difficult adapting to the work from home model, and employers were hesitant to bring in somebody during that because there was such uncertainty to what was going to happen. Will they bring somebody in, train them for perhaps 5 weeks, 6 weeks, and have to lay them off because of changes in COVID? So for the older worker, it's been very challenging, and I think that's who we've been working with a lot more throughout this. I was starting to see pre-pandemic the individuals coming in that were from outside of the Niagara area. Perhaps a spouse moved here because of work, and so the spouse unfamiliar with the labor market here, needed our assistance in finding work. So there's a number of reasons, but I'm seeing the older worker staying in there. But it's definitely changing. Employers are unsure which way to go. It does take them a little bit longer to find those jobs too. The employer that's willing to overlook I guess there's hesitancy when it comes to age, right? But they need to see the benefits when it comes to the older worker, because they do carry a skill set that maybe the younger worker does not have.
So we're seeing the workforce actually increased. We also have shortages.
Yep.
Of some people leaving the workforce because of COVID. Where are all these new people coming from who've actually increased the workforce, Vivian?
I think, to kind of build on what Paul was saying there, I think I'm really looking forward to the 2021 census coming out, because those figures will really give us an indication of how Niagara's demographics have changed between 2016 and 2021. I think my gut is telling me we're going to see more surprise changes than you would expect, and over the previous 5-year intercensal period. But a couple of other factors here worth considering. First of all, the pandemic has created a remote workforce as well. So I think some of the people that have maybe, and this is anecdotal, there's no data yet to support it, the workforce may have grown in Niagara because more people are living in Niagara, but not necessarily working in Niagara. That could be because they're working remotely. We saw a huge exodus from Toronto in the housing market as people sought housing, in more affordable housing in the periphery around Toronto, but they could still maintain Toronto-based jobs. Whether those folks end up having to return to the city, who knows? But we do know statistically that during the pandemic, on our monthly labor market reports, the increase in those working in professional categories increased significantly. That was a big jump when you look pre-pandemic and then monthly through the pandemic. The number of people in Niagara that were working in those types of jobs did increase. Where did they come from? Some of them may have been in jobs created here in Niagara, but my gut's also telling me that it's people who come to Niagara, but they're working elsewhere.
How's that survey administered? Is it administered to employers, or is it like how?
No. This is the Stats Canada gives us the first week of every month, gives us the employment stats for the previous month, and we look at that and we compare it month on month, year on year. And what we've been doing is comparing it 2-year, because we go back to pre-pandemic as well, because there's no point in actually comparing it. Well, you can't compare it to last year, but it was such a weird year, 2020.
Yeah. But do they compare it to do they get their results through employers, or do they get their results through the public?
It's a panel, yeah, Blake. It's a panel that Stats Canada have where they poll people for a fixed period of time. Yeah, and then they extrapolate that data to create the scene. And they do it right across Canada, and we can get that at Niagara level.
Yeah. Blake, what do you think?
Well, I was just going to say the sample is about 3,000. It's a randomized sample in Niagara. They survey 3,000 people in Niagara, then they extrapolate that across the regional economy. I checked quickly, and you're asked, like, where are these people coming from? And in terms of the growth in the labor force, they come from every age cohort except for the 65 plus. Yep. So, and we saw a major growth in the 25-year-old to 44-year-old demographic cohort. So that kind of tells you where they're, who's coming into the labor force. And I would suspect a lot of those people are moving in from outside of the area.
Right.
So maybe in the past, people may have sold their houses in the GTA or what have you and come here. But now I think that's not just that, senior demographic. I think a lot from all the demographics are kind of doing that now. And just as Vivian mentioned, we'll be able to go a lot deeper on this once the 2021 census data is available. It starts to become available on February 9th. Then we'll start looking at the migration patterns and that sort of thing. Like, we don't have the data resources to actually answer your question specifically right now. But I agree with Vivian. It's going to be a lot of fun work to find out what is actually propelling all of this
what
change.
Is happening.
Yeah, because there's major changes in Niagara, and it'll be fun to uncover, what's behind all of that.
Yeah, I mean, the traditionally, again, we face. Correct me if I'm wrong. I work on mostly a lot of stuff. We face out migration from that kind of that 20-year-old kind of demographic with people going into the city to get their jobs. So with the pandemic in place, preventing people from finding those kind of jobs outside or actually just working remotely. I mean that could also be a kind of outcome of the pandemic, where we're actually able to keep more of our young people actually here to establish their lives here.
Yep, absolutely.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Vivian.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that's exactly what some of the we hope some of the data will validate, because that's kind of our gut feel. Blake's right, the 25 to 44 year old cohort are the people who are moving in, and that brings with them families and other demands and needs. So we are seeing the shift, and just to also, support what Blake was saying there too. Last year in 2020, when we were looking at the monthly stats, the biggest drop off of people out of the labor force were the over 55s. So, I mean, again, that does point to the labor shortage we're seeing right now is a lot of older people. I know there is some, particularly in certain sectors, as Paul has indicated, but in many of our traditional sectors, a lot of the older population did drop off. And at the same time, we haven't mentioned yet that through the pandemic, we saw a huge drop off Canada-wide in immigration. Yeah. So a lot of the people that were coming into our community as either formal, newcomers, immigrants, or even through the student visa system are just not here. And I think that is maybe leading to some kind of difficulties. Yeah, even temporarily in the labor market, where there just isn't the availability of staff to keep restaurants open, retail at full capacity. There's just people aren't here.
What do you experience in West Niagara, Paul, as it relates to new immigrants as it relates to new immigrants? Are you seeing? Because obviously there's been a drop off, but what's your experience?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a drop off, but we've never had a huge population. We're kind of in that area where it's difficult to access. I think our lack of transportation has always been one area that has made it difficult for immigrants to come into this area. So we don't tend to see a huge number, and I think our numbers of those that we are serving are staying rather stat quo, I would say, throughout this time. There are things coming down the pike, though, that I've heard are going to make it easier for the those that are immigrating to the country to be able to get their current, I guess, certifications validated here. They won't have to go through as much red tape to get those things done in some of the high demand industries. I'm sure, Vivian, you're nodding your head. You may be able to build on that as well.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think when Blake has also mentioned looking ahead, labor shortages are going to be a struggle for us just based on our own demographics. I think the Blake, you may correct me, but the stats say that we're into the late 20s before that younger cohort of 18-year-olds rebounds to levels that we saw a decade ago. So we're not got the young people graduating at high school, graduating at college, graduating at a university locally in order to fill all the jobs that we're going to need this decade. So we need to find other pipelines of talent, and I think newcomers is one of them. The government of Canada has got huge, ambitious goals for granting of new Canadians over the next 3 years. I mean, it's huge. And I think in Niagara, we would, having a kind of an organized way of saying, okay, what are our labor shortage? What are our talent needs? And how can we make sure we can tap into some of these new Canadians that are arriving very highly skilled? The stats show that new Canadians, even after 5 years of being here, are very underemployed, given their background, their training, their education, they're still very underemployed. So there's an opportunity for us all to kind of look at that and think, okay, how can we ease the way in which we understand international credentials. As Paul said, the provincial government has just made some announcements on that, which I think are great. And then in our local economy, how do we work with employers to help and support them to see the opportunities and ease that way in? So that's a huge opportunity for us going forward in Niagara, for sure, for the next few years.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Like I mean, I don't really think that, apart from things like, the temporary foreign workers program in the agriculture sector, I don't really think Niagara has relied too much on newcomers for its labor market. Do you see with what's happening in the workforce that's going to change? A, going to change. B, should change. C, has to change.
Well, I wanted to, good timing. I just wanted to pick up on Vivian's comments too. And I believe, I 100% agree with her. We need the immigration. We have a natural decline in our population, so there's no way around it really. One thing where I have some experience in is mentorship, mentoring newcomers. And I actually did it under one of Vivian's former programs of the Niagara Immigrant Employment Connections Initiative. So just myself, I mentored 10 different immigrants who are foreign trained professionals in things like computer science, engineering, that kind of stuff. They all have very good jobs now. All it took was that hand holding, Yeah. So this is my anecdotal experience, just advising them, mentoring them on how to navigate the job environment here. All of them had in-demand skills. All of them were highly employable, but they didn't understand the employment culture. And I just reviewing resumes and that kind of stuff, it just wasn't in line with how we do things around here. So it was actually quite simple, the type of mentorship they needed. Maybe each mentee took maybe 10 or 20 hours of my time over a few months. But that's just one anecdotal experience I have. There's many mentors under that program, but we need to do that at maybe 20 times the scale or 30 times the scale. Like all new foreign trained professionals would benefit from some type of mentorship arrangement like that. And I truly believe that can be an effective way to integrate them into the economy and be contributors and generate economic impact and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Is that mentorship program still available, Vivian?
Not as formally as Blake described there, but as a concept and as a method that we all have experience of working at. Yes, for sure. I mean, I think we need to sustain immigrant connections. And work with our settlement service providers as well, who are seeing a lot of these newcomers into our community from the get-go. Work with them on the employment opportunities and offer some of that kind of mentorship, but networking, connections. It's all about connections. And again, there's newly funded, provincial programs, whether they're at employment service centers or at new settlement centers, or we've got them at NWPB, who are actually focused on this. Like, we're actually trying to work collaboratively across the community with employers, with service providers to say, okay, what does everybody need in order to make these connections a bit more permanent and evaluate it. It's a golden opportunity right now, not only with the talent that is there to come in, but also, in our organization, we work at national level, talking to IRCC or Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada around, okay, let's kind of even target. I mean, who's coming in, and here's our labor market needs here. Can we attract people to our community that fill the labor market needs that we have? I think that's a great way forward, because then that helps everybody. It helps employers find the talent they need, but also helps newcomers who are looking to settle to find jobs quickly, and find jobs quickly commensurate with where they're at. And where they're at could be anywhere from, being a skilled tradesperson or being a qualified engineer. it needs to be at multiple levels of job need as well, not just very advanced professions.
Right. So Paul, how well do you think we are set up here in Niagara to mount and execute a newcomer strategy? And what do you think we need to do in order to make sure we can capitalize on this golden opportunity that Vivian identified?
Yeah, I think that we've got some of the groundwork laid. I think that the biggest obstacle, or that I talked about earlier, would be transportation throughout the Niagara area to get somebody, if you are coming in at Niagara Falls, how are you going to get to West Niagara, even into the Hamilton area, right? So that I think first and foremost needs to be looked at, so that we can facilitate what it.
Uh-oh, is that? Oh, that's Paul.
Yeah. Since
I've been in the labor market, I've been speaking with employers on how can we utilize foreign workers to help and they've all struggled with it. They from the manufacturing standpoint, they would love to be able to bring in foreign workers to assist them, but there's a lot of red tape that they've got to go through. It's very difficult. So I think one of the things is just educating them on how to go about it would really help as well.
I think there's a difference between foreign workers and newcomers.
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah. So Blake, what do you think? Are we well set up to take advantage of the opportunity to bring newcomers to help fill our labor shortage? And if not, what do you think we should do? Or if you think we're doing okay, what would you do to enhance it?
Well, we're doing all right. I think the province could do a whole lot better in having more provincial resources around this area. Again, I'm a pretty big proponent of that mentorship, of guiding newcomers when they're here, so that they can be more attractive to your manufacturer or what have you. So Niagara, we're doing all right. We had some great programs, like I mentioned, the one under the Workforce Planning Board. That was an excellent program with lots of participants that helped settle like many people. So that said, we need to be doing better, but it's not a Niagara issue. It's a national and provincial issue. And a lot of those resources are going to have to come from those levels of government. And then having willing people here to work with the newcomers. That's also important, to actually have the mentorship, to have the services. Like Paul probably sees a lot of newcomers, or Paul's counterparts in more places like St. Catharines, where you might see more and more newcomers, but having those settlement services and ensuring that there's sufficient, like we have them now, but I think there should be more investment, just because I believe that's where we're going to get the skills of tomorrow, or at least a lot of them. So that's my point.
Everybody is going to be fighting for the same opportunity, the same skilled workers who are newcomers. Vivian, do you think we're set up to be in that game, or what would your recommendations be?
I think I would echo what Paul and Blake have said. As we have elements in place, but there's a lot of work to do. I think we need to really think about ourselves, as an inclusive community in its entirety. I think we have maybe strategized around, the economic development benefits of this kind of talent acquisition. And maybe this is a timely opportunity because the region is going into its 10-year economic plan, and I know all the municipalities are engaged with that. And I would guess, I'm just guessing, but at this particular point in time, labor and talent attraction and retention are going to be a part of that longer term economic development strategy, as labor plays such a key role in the growth and development of any community. But I think working together, working with the settlement services, working, very explicitly linking up settlement with employment, I think is an opportunity going forward. I think there's maybe little gaps there, not just in Niagara, but in the system at large, across, as Blake was saying, across Ontario, even across Canada. Some of the tables I sit around, there is a real interest in thinking about, okay, how can we ensure that these newcomers are also linked to employment through mentorship, through explicit hiring opportunities, and then working with employers, providing them with the resources to feel secure about who they're hiring, understanding backgrounds and educational backgrounds and credentials. And there's a lot of resources around to help smooth that as well, I think, emerging in Niagara, but there's also a lot across Ontario. So we're not there yet, John, but I think the opportunity is presenting itself to us right now.
Interesting. So we do have a question in the Q&A, so let's roll through that one. With so many entry-level blue-collar positions available, how do we help businesses fill these positions? Many small businesses are still struggling to recover from closures and revenue loss due to the pandemic. How do we attract people? How do we attract the people resources they need to survive, recover, and to thrive? So we have vacancies, we have lost revenue through the pandemic, yet higher demands to spend more. How do companies deal with that? What do you think, Blake? That's an easy question.
So obviously tough during the pandemic. Obviously it hit small businesses the hardest, but we're in recovery. Just in Niagara alone, there's about $2 billion in pent-up disposable income that never got spent during the pandemic. So that's going to help float a lot of these small businesses. When you look provincially, last I looked, it was about $40 billion in pent-up disposable income. So one way to help these businesses would be to do buy local campaigns, to market our tourism and hospitality opportunities to domestic visitors right in our own backyard in Ontario, because we know that there's this pent up disposable income and we want people to spend it here in Niagara. So that's one way to support these small businesses. I know through some of the survey research, a lot of the businesses specified it would take anywhere between 1 to 3 years for them to fully recover financially from the pandemic. So I believe we need that amount of time in terms of some public supports to help sustain these businesses until we can see, that pent-up disposable income being spent in our economy. I believe it's necessary to have the government supports because I think it's going to come back strong, but we're not there yet. I still believe tourism's still going to struggle for another year or so in terms until the borders are opened up and people can move more freely again and businesses aren't restricted in terms of how many patrons they can have in their business or what they can actually do as a business. So that said, I think it's coming back, but I think we do need to have financial supports to help float some of the hardest hit businesses, particularly in accommodation, food services, hospitality, retail trade. So those are all the kind of the hardest hit. And those will take years to fully recover from a financial perspective.
Yeah, so we only have a few minutes left. And there's kind of two questions that I want to ask. One is a wrap-up question, so about your level of optimism about the future. But before we get there, we need to ask the inflation question because we've certainly been talking a lot about the job shortages. We know the impacts on supply chains. We know the impacts on prices. Prices are going up. When there's a big demand on and shortages of the workforce, then wages go up. There's been some talk about there was early talk that any inflationary pressures were going to be temporary. Now people are talking a little bit more like they may in fact be here for over the longer term. What kind of an impact do you think inflation is going to have on the workforce going forward, Vivian?
I think it's a great question. I think there's a lot of different factors that are going to be taken into consideration. We're definitely in the context of wage inflation right now, and because it's a supply side, favoring the supply side in the labor market right now, people can be more demanding of wages. I think employers need to be very conscious of that. And of course, as we know, as wages go up, that fuels inflation because costs go up right across the board. I think personally, if supply chain issues get sorted out in the kind of medium term, maybe that will relieve the pressure, the inflation pressure. It doesn't relate necessarily to wages, but it may relieve the problem around scarcity of some resources right now. So we may find that prices drop a little bit because things become more available or the supply chain is moving a bit more smoothly. But in the labor market right now, it definitely, I think wages are going up, and they're going up at a rate of premiers. Well, the indication is the premier is going to put up minimum wage in January, even though there was, that was put on hold when they were at the last election. The Niagara Poverty Reduction Network just announced Niagara living wage is up to $18.90 as of this week, and there's more and more employers signing up for that. So there is going to be definitely inflationary pressures generated by wages, but hopefully it won't, from my perspective, it won't necessarily lead to some of the broader macroeconomic problems that inflation tends to foster.
Yeah. What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, no, I have to echo everything she was saying. I was actually recently when we did see the minimum wage get increased at the beginning of October. I went through I had to go through our job board and adjust all of the salaries, any wages that were at a minimum wage up to the new minimum wage. Yeah. And at that time we had I think it was 110, 115 jobs on our job board. Just 5 were minimum wage.
Right.
So we're already seeing employers ahead of the curve right there. So yeah, I think that it's certainly something that they've had to do. I'm seeing a lot more employers advertising that they are a living wage employer. So that only really came about. We started hearing a lot about that. About 3 years ago? I would say 4 years ago in the Niagara area, and we're really seeing a lot of employers jumping on board with the living wage endorsement.
Yeah.
Can I just say, sorry, just to back up on that. Can I just say to answer that? Even the question in the chat. Employers, something that employers could do is just pay attention to that wage, that offer, that wage offer, and take the data that's available. Like at NWPB, we can provide wage data that compares us with Niagara, with Hamilton, with Toronto, with where your competitors are, and it's an easy bit of data to tell people for every single occupation that would be out there. So paying attention to that may be a solution to being able to attract and then retain.
Yeah. What do you think? Like, we only have a couple of minutes left. We only have a minute left. I'm not going to get to my follow-up question.
My thoughts, we had a period of deflation at the start of the pandemic, and we're playing catch up right now. I don't think this is going to be prolonged. However, I think some of the wage gains and some of the price increases may be here to stay. So, so yes, it's going to be tough for a little while, but then I can see it stabilizing through 2022, basically. And that's what I've been reading a lot of the economists in Canada suggesting. You hear the word transitory, but that's my belief. I don't think it's here to stay. I don't think the economy can sustain it. I don't think the wage rates of people can sustain it. So I believe that throughout 2022, we're going to see it come back to more of a normal level, around 2%.
So really kind of anchoring as the economy kind of the kind of spending patterns kind of reflatten out across the broad base of the economy, as opposed to it being sort of concentrated in one sectors and very small in other sectors, which create all of these crazy pressures. as spending habits start to normalize, then those inflationary pressures will start to ease.
Exactly.
Right. That's all the time that we have. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Vivian Kinnaird from the Workforce Planning Board, Paul Robertson from the Employment, oh my goodness, Help Center, and Blake Landry from Niagara Economic Development. It's really been a great conversation. Next week we will be talking about affordable housing as a part of Niagara's Road to Recovery. Our guests will be Jim Bradley, the regional chair, Joanne Harritz, an assistant professor in political science from Brock University, Mark Bassiano from Mountain View Homes, and Nicole Regier, the interim executive director for Jillian's Place.
Wow.
So I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today, and we'll see you next time. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks.